The ground trembled beneath her feet, a silent premonition no one else could feel. The roar she didn't hear, but felt, vibrating through her bones, was the death song of 7 polar bears, each a colossus weighing over a ton, starving and mere meters from the cave that guarded the life of her tribe. Anya, the deaf elder, gripped her ancestral staff, the ice cutting her skin. A snow whipped her face, and the air froze in her lungs, and she knew that the fate of 800 souls depended on her courageous silence. The icy air tore at her throat with each breath, but Anya felt no cold in her spirit. Her eyes, accustomed to the dim light and the white vastness, scanned the invisible horizon, searching for signs her ears could never catch. The snow, a thick and merciless veil, swallowed the world, transforming the familiar landscape into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. But for Anya, the danger was not in what was seen or heard. It was in what the earth told her, a secret language of tremors and resonances. The 7 ice colossi, each a mountain of flesh and fury, moved with calculated slowness, their heavy steps sending shockwaves through the permafrost. Anya could feel their hunger, a deep and desperate vibration that echoed her tribe's own urgency. The provisions, a cave carved into the heart of the eternal ice, represented the thin line between life and death for the 800 souls who depended on it. The scent of dried fish, cured reindeer meat and seal blubber, guarded with such care, was an irresistible invitation to the predators, a promised feast they were determined to claim. A shiver ran down Anya's spine, not of fear, but of iron determination. She tightened her wooden staff in her gloved hands, feeling the worn texture of the wood, each notch a memory of past summers and overcome winters. This staff, more than a support, was an extension of her own will, a link to the ancestors who had taught her to read the earth. Her thin lips curved into a firm line. There was no room for hesitation. The life of her people was a precious burden, and she would carry it with the same strength with which the earth carried the mountains. Inside the cave, her grandson, little Yuri, was perhaps dreaming of the warmth of a fire, oblivious to the silent siege forming outside. Her thoughts flew to the mothers rocking their children, to the elders telling stories by the fire, their soft voices filling the warm air. All of them, confident in the village's protection, slept a peaceful sleep, unaware that the cruelest winter in decades had brought with it an unprecedented threat, a hungry shadow lurking. The blizzard, which for them was just another test of nature's strength, for Anya was a shield, an ally that masked her own movements and the presence of the bears. She moved, not running, but gliding with the grace of one who knows every stone, every fissure in the ice, every treacherous curve of the terrain. Her feet, protected by reindeer hide boots, barely made a sound on the frozen surface. The wind howled, a constant lament, but she felt the direction of each gust, using it to her advantage, like a dancer with the melody of the storm. The first trap, a natural crevice in the ice, would need to be deepened, camouflaged with fresh snow to deceive the beasts. Her wrinkled fingers, despite her age, still possessed surprising agility, capable of manipulating the ice with the precision of a sculptor. She had no time to lament the solitude of her task. There was only the now, the urgency of every passing second. The weight of responsibility was immense, but the strength of her love for her community was even greater, an invisible fire that burned in her chest, warming her against the deadly cold of Yakutia. Anya took a deep breath, the icy air burning in her nostrils as her nimble fingers worked. The natural crevice in the ice, which she had chosen with years of wisdom, needed to be deeper, more treacherous. With her staff, she began to loosen blocks of ice, using it as a lever, her aged muscles protesting with each movement. A frown of concentration creased her brow, and her lips tightened. It was not an easy task, digging into the permafrost with the snow falling incessantly, but the image of the sleeping faces in her mind was a more powerful engine than any fatigue. She thought of Yuri, her grandson, with his curious eyes and easy smile. He was the promise of tomorrow, and Anya would not allow that promise to be stolen by the bear's hunger. Far away, but ever closer, the 7 white giants advanced. Their steps were not hurried, but carried the inevitability of a force of nature. The largest of them, a male scarred from ancient battles, sniffed the air, his massive head held high. The scent of the provisions, though faint and diluted by the wind and snow, was a tempting promise, a primitive call that propelled every fiber of his being. His small, dark eyes, almost lost in the vastness of his fur, fixed on the direction of the cave, an indistinct blur in the storm. They did not see the elder, did not hear her, but felt the presence of food, a reward for their long and exhausting journey through the white wilderness. Anya, her hands numb despite her gloves, finally achieved the desired depth. The crevice was now a hidden chasm, wide enough to trap a paw, but not so deep as to seriously injure, just enough to cause panic and disorientation. With careful movements, she began to cover the opening with thin layers of snow, smoothing the surface with her hands and staff, making it indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain. Her half-closed eyes evaluated the work, searching for any imperfection that might betray the trap. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, curved her lips, a small victory but vital for what was to come. She turned, feeling the bear's vibration intensify. They were approaching the outer perimeter of the cave, moving in a semicircle, exploring the terrain with the cunning of experienced predators. Anya knew their intelligence was as formidable as their brute force. She needed to be faster, more ingenious. The next step was crucial: strategic fires. Not to warm, but to create a barrier of smoke and flickering light that could scare them, disorient them, making them associate the place with danger, not food. With her staff firmly in hand, Anya began to move again. The blizzard, which had once seemed an ally, now intensified, making each step a struggle against the wind that tried to knock her down. Her body, though strong for her age, felt the weight of the task, exhaustion beginning to set in. But she could not stop. Time was an enemy, as relentless as the bears. She needed to find the right spots, sheltered from the wind, where the dry kindling she had prepared previously could be lit quickly. Each spot was a piece on the chessboard she played against nature. Her eyes swept the landscape, searching for depressions and rocks that would serve as shelter for the flames. The ice beneath her feet seemed to whisper, warning her of the predator's proximity. She could feel their hunger, a deep and desperate vibration that echoed her tribe's own urgency. The solitude was profound, but the connection with her land and her people was even stronger, an anchor that held her steady. She was not just an old woman, she was the guardian of a legacy, the protector of a future. And with that conviction, she continued, a tiny point of determination in a world of ice and fury, advancing to face the impossible. Anya continued her silent journey, staff forward, probing the terrain. The blizzard intensified, transforming the air into a white whirlwind, whipping her wrinkled face. Her eyes, though accustomed to the darkness and blinding snow, strained to distinguish the faint shapes of rocks and depressions that offered some protection from the wind. She felt the earth vibrate beneath her boots, a constant hum that grew stronger, more urgent. The bears were close, very close. Time was a luxury she did not possess. Her body, despite her willpower, began to protest. Her leg muscles burned, and the icy air seemed to scratch at her lungs with each deep breath. But the image of the sleeping faces in her mind, Yuri's innocent smile, the quiet wisdom of the elders, the hope in the eyes of the young mothers, was a balm for her pain, an inexhaustible source of energy. She could not fail. Not now. Anya found the first depression, a small recess in the rock covered by a layer of ice. It was perfect. With precise movements, she pulled a reindeer hide pouch from her waist, revealing small pieces of dry wood and moss carefully prepared. Lighting a fire in such conditions was an immense challenge, but Anya possessed the patience and technique of generations. She rubbed 2 flint stones with dexterity, sparks dancing briefly in the icy air before being swallowed by the snow. She repeated the movement again and again, her fingers stiff with cold, but her determination unwavering. Meanwhile, the largest of the polar bears, the old scarred male, stopped abruptly. His nostrils flared, sniffing the air. There was something different, a strange smell, not of food, but of smoke. Almost imperceptible, diluted by the storm, but present. His small, dark eyes pierced the darkness, but the blizzard was an impenetrable veil. A low growl escaped his throat, a silent warning to the other 6 who followed him. They also felt the change in the air, the subtle alteration in the scentscape. Finally, a small flame flickered in Anya's dry moss, a tiny but glorious victory. She protected it with her hands, blowing gently, feeding it with more wood shavings. The heat was faint, but smoke began to rise, thin and white, mixing with the snow. It was just the beginning. She needed more, much more. With a sigh of relief and a new breath, Anya stood up, leaving the first fire to struggle to establish itself, and moved on, seeking the next strategic point. She moved like a shadow, each step calculated, each movement economical. The blizzard, which had once been a barrier, now became an ally, spreading the smoke and making the origin of the scent even more diffuse for the bears. Anya felt the proximity of the beasts, the vibration of their heavy steps growing stronger, but she did not allow herself to panic. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Only concentration, ancestral wisdom, and the urgency of her mission guided her steps. The second fire was lit with a little more difficulty, Anya's fingers now almost numb, but the experience of the first helped her to be more efficient. She watched the flames fight against the wind, smoke rising in spirals. 2 fires, lit at strategic points, began to form an invisible barrier, a line of defense that she hoped would confuse and repel the predators. Her lips moved in a silent prayer to the spirits of the earth, asking for strength and protection. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but the fire in her heart, the love for her people, was stronger than any cold or fatigue. She was the guardian, and she would not retreat. Anya watched the second flame fight against the wind, smoke rising in spirals. 2 fires, lit at strategic points, began to form an invisible barrier, a line of defense that she hoped would confuse and repel the predators. Her lips moved in a silent prayer to the spirits of the earth, asking for strength and protection. Exhaustion weighed heavily on her, but the fire in her heart, the love for her people, was stronger than any cold or fatigue. She was the guardian, and she would not retreat. With a last look at the flickering flames, Anya turned, urgency pulsing in her veins. There was more to do. The plan required a semicircle of fires, an illusion of a siege that would drive the bears away from the cave entrance. Each step was a battle against the deep snow and the biting wind that seemed to want to tear her from the ground. She felt the earth, a constant vibration that intensified with the bear's proximity, a relentless reminder that time was running out. Her gloved fingers fumbled for her staff, the cold wood offering a silent comfort, an extension of her own resilience. The alpha male, the scarred bear, growled again, his head moving from side to side. The smell of smoke was stronger now, mingling with the tempting aroma of the provisions. It was a contradiction. Smoke meant danger, fire, but hunger was a cruel master, and instinct propelled them towards the source of food. The other 6 bears, though cautious, followed their leader, their massive bodies moving with surprising agility for their size. They approached the first crevice, the ice trap Anya had prepared. The elder found the third spot, a small rise that offered a strategic view and some protection. Her movements were slower now, every muscle aching. Age weighed heavily, and the cold seemed to penetrate to her bones, despite the furs. But the image of Yuri, her grandson, sleeping peacefully, was a shield against the pain, a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. She knelt with difficulty, her joints creaking, and began the ritual of fire starting again. The flint stones slipped from her numb hands, but she persisted, with the infinite patience of one who knows life in Yakutia. One of the younger bears, impatient and less experienced, advanced a little ahead of the group. His muzzle sniffed the air, and his dark eyes fixed on the seemingly untouched snow in front of him. One step, and the thin layer of ice gave way under his weight. A roar of surprise and pain escaped his throat as his forepaw sank into the crevice. The bear struggled, trying to free itself, and panic spread among the others. They recoiled, growling, confused and alarmed by the unexpected danger. Anya did not hear the roar, but felt the violent tremor of the earth, a shockwave that made her stop rubbing the stones. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, curved her lips. The first trap had worked. This would buy them time, perhaps a few precious minutes. With renewed urgency, she redoubled her efforts. And finally, a stubborn spark ignited the moss. The third fire began to smoke, adding another layer to her barrier. The alpha male, seeing the confusion and panic in his group, growled, trying to re-establish order. He sniffed the crevice, avoiding it cautiously, but hunger still propelled him. He knew the food was near, but the smoke, now coming from 3 different points, and the unexpected trap, were creating an aura of danger. They were not easy prey, but caution was innate, a primordial instinct for survival. Anya stood up, her body trembling with exhaustion, but her spirit unbreakable. 3 fires, 3 points of smoke and flickering light. It was not enough, but it was a start. She needed more to create a wall of confusion that would drive them away definitively. Her eyes swept the darkness, searching for the next point, the next refuge for her flame. The cold was excruciating, but the image of her people, safe in the cave, was a warmth that kept her moving, a promise she was determined to fulfill, whatever the cost. Anya raised her staff, using it for support as her knees faltered. The promise of safety for her people was a silent mantra, propelling her forward. The blizzard, a furious whirlwind, seemed to mock, pushing her back with every step. Her half-closed eyes searched for the next strategic point. She felt the bear's vibration, a dull growl that the earth transmitted, indicating they were regrouping, their caution mingled with hunger. The young bear, still trapped in the crevice, struggled furiously. The alpha male, watching, growled at the others, a mix of frustration and warning. He knew the danger was real, but the provisions were vital. His cunning eyes swept the landscape, trying to decipher the mystery of the smoke and the trap. He felt that something was wrong, that the hunt would not be simple. The elder, with monumental effort, reached a small rocky outcrop, perfect for the 4th fire. Her fingers, almost numb, struggled to open the pouch of moss and wood shavings. The flint stones slipped from her numb hands, and despair threatened. But Anya did not yield. She thought of Yuri, of his laughter, of the love that was her shield against the cold and fatigue. Finally, a stubborn spark ignited the moss. Anya blew carefully, protecting the embryonic flame. The heat was minimal, but smoke began to rise, joining the other 3, forming a diffuse curtain. 4 fires, a barrier of smoke and the scent of fire, a warning to the predators. The alpha male felt the new wave of smoke. It was too much. The survival instinct, stronger than hunger, screamed in his primitive mind. He growled loudly, a sound that, if Anya could hear, would have made her tremble. It was not a growl of attack, but of frustration and confusion. The other bears, who had approached the crevice, now recoiled, their massive bodies moving with hesitation. The trap and the fires worked, creating a zone of uncertainty that they were reluctant to cross. Anya, exhausted, felt the change in the earth's vibrations. The bears were moving away, albeit slowly. A faint wave of relief coursed through her body, but she knew it was not the end. They were persistent and hunger powerful. She needed to reinforce the message. With her staff, she began to strike the ice, creating a constant rhythm, a dull thud that echoed, a language only she and the beasts understood. It was not a sound but a vibration, a clear warning. This land was protected. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each strike of the staff an affirmation of her will. The ice responded, transmitting the message. The alpha male stopped, his nostrils flared, and his eyes fixed in the direction of the cave. The rhythmic tapping, combined with smoke and the trap, was an undeniable sign of danger. The hunt was not worth the risk. He turned his massive head and, with a final warning growl, began to move away, followed by the other bears. The young one in the crevice would soon free itself, but the main group was already retreating. Anya, observing the retreat through her senses, felt the final exhaustion take over, but a smile of victory lit up her wrinkled face. The village was safe. Anya, observing the retreat through her senses, felt the final exhaustion take over, but a smile of victory lit up her wrinkled face. The village was safe. Her body trembled from the biting cold and the dissipating tension. Every muscle ached, and breathing was a monumental effort. Leaning on her staff, she felt the absence of the bears, the diminishing hungry vibration. The silence was the absence of threat, a profound relief. But vigilance was second nature. The frozen heart of Yakutia did not forgive complacency. With effort, she straightened her spine, searching for signs that the bears might only be temporarily retreating. The blizzard continued strong, a white and impenetrable veil. She needed to ensure that the fires her smoke sentinels remained lit. Dragging her feet, Anya began to move towards the first fire. The faint warmth was a solace, and the smoke rose, a sign of its persistence. As she approached the crevice, she felt a new vibration. It was different from the heavy thuds of the bears, a whisper of the earth that became a silent scream in her perception. A constant tremor, which did not fit the known pattern. Anya stopped, her staff planted in the ice. She closed her eyes, concentrating her perception on that new and unsettling sign. It was something coming from below, a resonance from the permafrost, a dissonant and alarming melody. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from apprehension. This vibration. It was the ice cracking, something deeper, structural. The cave, the vital store of provisions, was built into the eternal ice. If the ice beneath the village was giving way, the threat of the bears would be insignificant. The 800 souls of the village would be in unimaginable danger. Anya knelt with difficulty, placing the palm of her hand directly on the ice. The vibration was unmistakable, a continuous hum coming from all directions. Her mind was focused on the urgent message the earth was sending her. The turning point had arrived, and it was not the end of the battle, but the beginning of an insidious new threat. The bears had been repelled, but the earth itself now seemed to turn against them. Her eyes widened, a mix of shock and renewed determination. She had fought against hunger, giant beasts, and deadly cold. Now she needed to fight against the instability of the permafrost. As elder, she knew that the ice groaned and shifted, but this vibration was different, more urgent and dangerous, a prelude to catastrophe. The heart of Yakutia beat in alarm, a warning only she could decipher. Anya stood up, exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a new surge of adrenaline. She needed to return to the cave, warn her people, and stabilize the ice before it was too late. The staff, once a support, now became an instrument of detection, probing the ground for the crack. The blizzard continued, but the danger was beneath her feet. a silent and invisible threat that only she perceived. The love for her people, for Yuri, burned brightly, a beacon of hope and courage. Anya felt no cold, no pain, only the pulsing urgency of the earth beneath her feet. The staff, once a support against the fury of the bears and the snow, was now an extension of her perception, probing the ice for the truth. Each tap resonated in her gloved hands, traveling up her arms to her chest, where her heart beat a frenzied rhythm of alarm. The vibration of the cracking ice was a silent lament, a desperate cry that only she could hear. It was not a single crack, but a complex web, spreading like invisible roots beneath the surface. The blizzard continued to whip, a white curtain that tried to blind and disorient her, but Anya did not give in. Her eyes, though tired, swept the landscape, searching for landmarks, memorizing every rock, every depression. The cave, her refuge and that of her people, was her destination, and she needed to reach it before the ice gave way. Fear, a luxury she couldn't afford, was replaced by an iron determination. The image of Yuri, her grandson, sleeping safely, was the fuel that propelled her forward, a beacon in the midst of the storm. Her leg muscles burned, each step a battle against the deep snow that tried to trap her. The icy air burned her lungs, and exhaustion threatened to bring her down. But Anya did not stop. She felt the fragility of the ground beneath her feet, a dangerous dance between solidity and abyss. The vibration intensified as she approached the village, a growing chorus of cracks, as if the very heart of Yakutia was breaking apart. She knew that the cave, built into the permafrost, was vulnerable. The provisions, the future of all, rested on ground that now trembled. With a monumental effort, Anya reached the outer perimeter of the village. The fires she had lit still smoked, their flames flickering, a reminder of the recently won battle against the bears. But this new threat was more insidious, more pervasive. It was not a hungry beast, but the earth itself, the foundation of their existence. She felt panic growing within her, not for herself, but for her people. How could she warn them of a danger they could neither see nor hear? She approached the cave entrance, her staff striking the ice with more force. The vibration there was deafening to her senses, a silent roar of imminent destruction. She could feel the tiny fractures spreading like frozen veins throughout the structure. The ice walls of the cave, which once seemed unshakable, now whispered their own fragility. At the entrance, a young hunter, Boris, stood guard, wrapped in thick furs, his face red from the cold. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness of the blizzard, perceived nothing unusual, only the exhausted elder returning. He nodded, a gesture of respect, unaware of the terror Anya carried on her shoulders. Anya rushed towards him, her movements clumsy from exhaustion and urgency. She gestured frantically, pointing to the ground, to the cave walls, her wide eyes expressing the gravity of the situation. Boris looked at her with confusion, his brow furrowed. He didn't understand. The elder, always so calm and wise, now seemed overcome by an unusual despair. She struck her staff against the ground with all her remaining strength, repeatedly, trying to transmit the vibration, the message. The dull thud of the impact echoed, but to Boris it was just the noise of a tired old woman. He tried to hold her arm, imagining she needed rest, but Anya pulled away, her determination unwavering. She needed to make them understand. Everyone's life depended on it. With a last effort, she knelt, placing the palm of her hand on the ice and gesturing for Boris to do the same. Her eyes pleaded, begging him to feel what she felt, to hear the silent scream of the earth. The battle against the bears had been won, but the true struggle, the most treacherous, was just beginning. Boris, hesitant, looked at Anya's outstretched hand. His respect for the elder was deep, but his young mind, accustomed to visible dangers, struggled to comprehend the urgency in her eyes. Her silent plea made him kneel, placing his hand beside hers on the ice. Initially, Boris felt nothing but the cold. The blizzard howled, and the wind seemed to carry away all sounds. Anya watched him with painful expectation, her eyes burning with dread and determination. She moved her head, indicating for him to concentrate, to feel. Boris closed his eyes, trying to clear his mind. Then a subtle hum, almost imperceptible, like the beat of a distant heart, but constant. It was not the wind, nor the cold. It was something coming from below, a vibration that seemed to resonate through his bones. He frowned, opening his eyes to Anya. She nodded, gravely. The vibration increased, a faint, unmistakable tremor. Boris felt a shiver from a danger he couldn't name. Anya removed her hand from the ice and pointed to the interior of the cave, then to the ground, with a circular motion, indicating something spreading. Her lips moved, forming inaudible words, but the urgency on her face was eloquent. She gestured for him to stand up and warn everyone. Boris stood up, his heart pounding. The ground beneath his feet felt alive and restless. The elder was not delirious. There was something real, terrible. He looked at the cave, their refuge, and panic began to form. The provisions, the entire village, rested on this trembling surface. Anya, perceiving the understanding in his eyes, touched his gloved shoulder, a gesture of trust and encouragement. Communication was a challenge, but human connection transcended words. Boris, now convinced, nodded, his eyes wide with concern. He turned to the cave entrance, ready to shout, but Anya held him back again. She shook her head, indicating that shouting was not enough. She pointed to the staff, to the ground, and made a tapping motion, then to herself, to him, and into the cave. She wanted him to do the same, to transmit the vibration, the silent message, so that everyone could feel the imminent danger. It was a difficult task, but Anya trusted in the sensitivity of her people. Boris understood. It wasn't just about warning, but about making them feel it. He took Anya's staff, which she offered with a look of hope. His eyes met hers, a silent promise that he would do whatever it took. With the staff in hand, he turned to the cave entrance, feeling the ice vibrate beneath his feet. The danger was invisible, silent, but real. He needed to be Anya's ears, the voice of the earth. He entered the cave, the heavy staff in his hands. The sound of the blizzard diminished, but the hum of cracking ice seemed amplified in his mind. The sleeping faces of his people, the children nestled in furs, the elders in their dreams, everything depended on him. The battle against the bears had been won by Anya, but now the village faced an even greater threat coming from below. Boris felt the weight of responsibility and the strength of Anya's determination. He would not fail her, nor his people. Boris entered the cave, the heavy staff in his hands. The sound of the blizzard diminished, but the hum of cracking ice seemed amplified in his mind. The sleeping faces of his people, the children nestled in furs, the elders in their dreams, everything depended on him. The battle against the bears had been won by Anya, but now the village faced an even greater threat coming from below. Boris felt the weight of responsibility and the strength of Anya's determination. He would not fail her, nor his people. The air inside the cave was warmer, saturated with the scent of ancient fire smoke and the familiar aroma of furs and dried meat. Small fires crackled at strategic points, casting dancing shadows on the ice walls. Most of the inhabitants still slept deeply, exhausted by the tension of previous days. Boris hesitated, his staff raised. How to awaken them without causing unnecessary panic, yet conveying the urgency Anya had instilled in him. He remembered her pleading gaze, her hand on the ice. It wasn't enough to speak, they needed to feel it. With a sigh, Boris approached the center of the cave, where families slept in tight circles. He struck his staff against the ice floor, not with violence, but with a firm and steady rhythm, as Anya had done. The dull sound reverberated, but it wasn't the sound he wanted to transmit. It was the vibration. He struck again and again, concentrating on making the ice tremble. Some heads rose, sleepy eyes blinking in the dim light. A man grunted, turning over. A woman pulled her blanket higher, annoyed by the interruption. Boris felt a pang of despair. They didn't understand. He knelt, placing the palm of his hand on the ice, and gestured for the nearest people to do the same. His eyes, once filled with apprehension, now showed a silent plea. A young mother with a baby nestled in her arms looked at him with curiosity. She hesitated, but the intensity on Boris's face convinced her. Carefully, she extended her free hand and placed it on the ice. At first, she felt only the cold, but Boris continued to strike the staff, an insistent rhythm, and the vibration began to manifest. A faint tremor, almost imperceptible, but there. The young mother's eyes widened. She looked at Boris, then at the ground. He nodded gravely. Others began to awaken, intrigued by the scene. An elder, Semyon, known for his wisdom and sharp hearing even in old age, approached. He had felt something different in the air, an unease that wasn't from the wind. Semyon knelt without Boris asking, placing his wrinkled hand on the ice. He closed his eyes, concentrating. The vibration, once subtle, was now clearer. A continuous hum that seemed to come from within the earth itself. His eyes opened, filled with a somber understanding. He looked at Boris, then towards the cave entrance, as if searching for Anya. Boris pointed to the ground, then to the walls, and made a circular motion, indicating the extent of the danger. The news, silent and invisible, began to spread. Boris, with the staff, went from family to family, tapping the ice and gesturing. People, one by one, placed their hands on the ground, and the expression of drowsiness gave way to shock, to apprehension. The hum, the vibration, was undeniable. Fear set in, but it was not a paralyzing fear. It was a fear that awakened, that demanded action. Outside, Anya, still leaning on her staff, felt the change. The earth's vibration intensified, but now there was a new resonance, an echo of human movement inside the cave. She knew Boris was fulfilling his task. Her heart filled with silent pride. Her people, even without hearing, were beginning to feel. The connection, the trust, was the bridge that united them all. The blizzard continued to howl, but inside the cave, the village awakened to a new and terrible challenge, ready to face it together. Boris observed the faces of his people, once asleep in the illusory peace of the cave, now transformed by the understanding of the invisible danger. The young mother, with the baby nestled, pressed her hand to the ice, her eyes fixed on Boris, a silent, terrified question. He nodded, the gravity of the situation weighing on every gesture. Semyon, the elder, rose slowly, his wrinkles deeper, but his eyes conveying a calm determination. He pointed to the ground, then to the walls, confirming what Anya had tried to communicate. The vibration, now felt by many, was an irrefutable testimony. The murmur grew, not of panic, but of apprehension. People stood up. The warmth of human communion contrasting with the cold of the ice. Boris, with Anya's staff, ensured that everyone felt the tremor. Frightened or curious children placed their small hands on the ice, their childlike eyes wide as they felt the hum. Anya, outside, felt the change. The echo of human vibrations inside the cave was stronger now, a chorus of hearts beating in unison with the groaning ice. She knew Boris had succeeded. A faint relief coursed through her body. But there was no time for rest. The threat was imminent, and the solution would require the wisdom of all. She turned to the cave entrance, the blizzard strong, but her steps firmer, propelled by a new urgency. Inside the cave, Semyon took the lead. His hoarse voice cut through the murmur. Anya warned us. The earth speaks through her, and now through us. The ice beneath our feet is breaking. His eyes swept the crowd. We must act with wisdom. We cannot simply flee into the blizzard. The provisions, our life, are here. Mikhail, a young hunter, spoke. But how? How do we fight against the earth itself? We cannot patch cracks in a frozen lake. His words echoed the despair of many. Semyon raised his hand. Not with brute force, my young one, with intelligence, with the knowledge of our ancestors. The permafrost is alive, it moves, but it can also be guided, stabilized. We need to understand what is causing this. He looked at Boris, then towards the cave entrance. Anya, she is the only one who truly understands the ice. She will guide us. Boris exited the cave, finding Anya at the entrance. The elder needed no words. The vibration in his shoulders, the seriousness in her eyes, all spoke of the new responsibility. He gestured, indicating that the people had understood and that Semyon was calling for her. Anya nodded, her wrinkled face displaying a mix of weariness and renewed determination. She had fought against the bears to protect life. Now she would fight against the earth itself to preserve their home. Upon entering the cave, a respectful silence greeted her. All eyes were on her, the small figure of the elder, the silent guardian of her village. She felt the collective vibration of apprehension, but also of hope. With her staff still in her hands, she walked to Semyon, who awaited her with a look of deep reverence. Semyon gestured, pointing to the ground, then to the provisions. Anya knelt, placing her hand on the ice, closing her eyes. The vibration was a map in her mind, revealing the veins of fragility. She stood up, and with her staff began to draw on the ice floor, tracing the invisible lines of the cracks, showing their direction and intensity. It was a map of danger, visible to all. People crowded around, observing the map Anya drew, a tangible representation of the invisible terror. Semyon, with his wisdom, understood the patterns. He gestured to Anya, asking about the cause of the instability. Anya shook her head, indicating that the cause was deep, perhaps a subterranean movement of the earth or the pressure of a harsh winter. The elder then pointed to specific spots on the map, indicating where the cracks were most critical. She gestured, suggesting that at these points, the weight of the provisions and the people should be redistributed. The idea was to alleviate the pressure, to buy time. It was a temporary but essential solution. The community, united by the understanding of the danger, began to organize. Children were instructed to stay in the safest areas, and the strongest prepared to move the heavy furs and food sacks. The fight against the ice had begun, a silent and desperate battle for survival. Anya watched, her heart heavy, but also filled with pride. Her people did not surrender. They would fight, as they had always fought, against the hardships of Yakutia. She felt the earth's vibration, still in alarm. But now there was a new resonance, that of hope and collective action. The community, spurred by Anya's silent map and Semyon's urgent words, plunged into the Herculean task. Men and women, young and old, moved with determination, their faces marked by apprehension, but also by unwavering courage. Sacks of dried meat, heavy furs, and tools were carefully redistributed, following the invisible lines Anya had traced. Each movement was calculated, each step a silent prayer that the ice would hold. Boris, with Anya's staff in hand, coordinated the effort, his eyes fixed on the elder, seeking any sign, any gesture that might indicate a change. He felt the vibrations of the ice through the staff, a constant hum that now seemed to pulse with the urgency of the work. Anya, seated on a fur in the center of the cave, kept her hands firmly planted on the icy floor. Her eyes closed. She was the incarnation of perception, the silent guardian who listened to the earth. The vibrations were a complex chorus, the groaning of the cracks, The movement of the people, the beating of 800 hearts. She felt the pressure alleviating in some spots, but in others the tension seemed to increase, as if the ice was protesting against human intervention. A new and disturbing vibration began to manifest, deeper, more threatening. It was not just the ice cracking superficially, but a structural instability, a subterranean movement that threatened to destabilize the very foundation of the cave. Suddenly, a dull, deep sound echoed through the cave, a groan that made the air vibrate. For those who could hear, it was the sound of the permafrost giving way. For Anya, it was a deafening roar of despair, a wave of vibrations that made her stagger. Her eyes opened wide with dread. She stood up abruptly, pointing with her staff to a section of the ice wall near where most of the provisions were stored. A crack, once thin as a hairline, now visibly widened, a deep scar stretching up and down. Small fragments of ice began to fall like frozen tears. Panic threatened to engulf the cave, muffled cries, whispers of terror. The children, once curious, now clung to their parents, their eyes reflecting the adults' fear. Semyon, with a pale face, ran to Anya, anguish evident in every feature. "What do we do, Elder? We cannot move everything in time." His voice, though low, carried the urgency of a dire warning. Anya did not hear his words, but felt the despair in the vibration of his body. She touched the ground again, her fingers probing the deepening crack. Her mind, a whirlwind of ancestral wisdom and experience, sought a solution. She remembered the ancient stories, the methods her ancestors used to deal with unstable ice. One could not fight nature, but one could work with it. She closed her eyes for an instant, visualizing the flow of water, the power of freezing. She opened her eyes, a new spark of determination in them. She pointed to the crack and then to the fires that still crackled. Then she gestured to the fresh snow accumulating at the cave entrance. Her idea was bold, almost unthinkable. She needed water, a lot of water, and heat. Boris, observing every movement, tried to decipher the message. Water, heat, snow. He approached, his brow furrowed in concentration. Anya then made a melting motion for the snow, and then a pouring motion for the water into the cracks. Next, a freezing gesture, pointing to the cold outside. The idea began to form in Boris's mind. Melt snow to get water, pour it into the cracks, and let the extreme cold of Yakutia freeze it again, sealing the fissures. It was a race against time, a desperate gamble against nature itself. Semyon, beside Boris, understood the idea, his eyes widening at the audacity of the plan. "She wants us to heal the ice with ice itself," he exclaimed, his hoarse voice filled with admiration and apprehension. The community, seeing Anya's determination and the understanding of their leaders, began to move again, but now with a new purpose and renewed energy. Pots and containers were hastily gathered. Men and women ran to the fires, melting the snow, while others prepared to pour the water into the cracks. The climax was not a confrontation, but a race against catastrophe, a demonstration of human resilience in the face of the impossible, guided by the silent wisdom of an elder. The future of the village was now in everyone's hands, in the water that would heal the ice. The future of the village was now in everyone's hands, in the water that would heal the ice. A frenzy of activity took over the cave. Women and children, with pots and bowls, hurried to collect the fresh snow that Boris and other young hunters brought from the entrance, protected from the biting wind. The fires, once used for heating and cooking, were now strategically relocated near the most critical cracks, their flames licking the ice walls, melting the snow into a dense steam that filled the air. The scent of smoke and melted ice mingled with the aroma of sweat and effort. Boris, with Anya's staff still in his hands, ran between the groups, his eyes fixed on the elder. He felt the urgency of the earth through the staff. a hum that now mingled with the murmur of the community. "More snow, more water," he exclaimed, his voice hoarse but filled with new authority. Semyon, the elder, guided the younger ones, ensuring that the water was poured carefully, without causing further erosion. Slowly, with precision, every drop is a promise of life. Anya, seated on a fur, kept her hands firmly on the cracked ice. Her eyes closed. She was the heart of the operation, the guiding compass. The vibrations were intense, a chorus of groans from the ice, but now, beneath this cacophony, she began to feel a subtle change. The chaotic tremor gave way to a more rhythmic, more controlled pulse. When the hot, almost boiling water was poured into the fissures, she felt a brief expansion, a sigh from the ice, before the extreme cold of Yakutia instantly transformed it into a solid, transparent, and resistant layer. It was like watching a deep wound closing miraculously. Small fragments of ice stopped falling. The cracks, once threatening, began to seal over, filled by the water that became ice, a visible and tangible healing. The dull sound of the permafrost giving way, which had frightened everyone, diminished, replaced by the crackling of the fires and the whisper of the ice rejoining. Relief began to spread through the cave like a warm wave. Faces, once tense and pale, gradually relaxed. The children, who had nestled into their parents, now watched with renewed curiosity the spectacle of water turning into ice. The young mother, with her baby in her lap, let out a deep sigh, her eyes meeting Boris's with a gleam of gratitude. Anya opened her eyes. A faint smile, almost imperceptible, touched her wrinkled lips. The earth's vibration, though still present, was now one of stability, of repose. She raised her hand, a slow and tired gesture, but one that Boris understood immediately. It was a sign that the immediate danger had been contained. Semyon approached Anya, kneeling beside her. He touched the ice, feeling the newfound solidity. "You saved us again, Elder," he whispered, though he knew she could not hear him. His eyes, however, conveyed all the reverence and gratitude of the village. Boris, exhausted, but with a light heart, returned the staff to Anya. She took it, and with it, touched the ground, a final gesture of connection with the earth she had calmed. The cave, their home, the provisions, everything was safe. The community, united by a common fear and collective action, had overcome another impossible challenge, guided by Anya's silent wisdom. The threat of cracking ice had been resolved, and the village breathed in a silence of deep gratitude. The silence that followed the frenzy of activity was not the oppressive silence of the blizzard, but one of relief and reverence. The cave, once a stage of contained panic, now pulsed with restored calm. The villagers, exhausted but light-hearted, settled down. Many touched the ice floor, feeling the newly acquired solidity, confirming that the danger had receded. The scent of smoke and melted ice lingered, a tangible reminder of the battle won. Anya, seated on her fur, seemed smaller and fragile, but radiated unwavering strength. Her eyes, once wide with dread, now reflected deep serenity. She still held her staff, the worn wood an extension of her being, a link to the earth she had saved. Boris knelt, speechless, but with a look of gratitude and admiration. He squeezed Anya's wrinkled hand. She smiled, a tired but genuine smile that reached her eyes. Semyon, with his hoarse voice, broke the silence. "Elder Anya," he began, "you guided us through the darkness, first against the hungry beasts, and now against the earth itself. Your wisdom is a beacon." The community nodded in unison, many with tears in their eyes. The young mother, with her sleeping baby, approached, bowing her head in respect. The gleam in her eyes and the tightness in her chest spoke for themselves. The children, curious and safe, watched Anya with new admiration. For them, the deaf elder, once distant, had become a legendary figure, a silent guardian who understood the world's secrets. They approached, some extending small hands to touch the staff, as if wanting to absorb its magic. Anya, feeling their approach and vibration, opened her arms, and the children nestled into her, finding comfort and security. Boris watched the scene, his heart overflowing. He had been Anya's ears, the voice of her wisdom, and the experience had transformed him. He now understood that true strength lay in the connection with the earth, in silent listening, in wisdom that transcends words. Anya's legacy would not only be the saved provisions, but the renewal of faith in their traditions, in their people's ability to face the impossible with unity and intelligence. Semyon, beside Boris, seemed to read his thoughts. "The winter is still long," he said, his voice softer, "but we will face whatever comes, together." With Anya's wisdom, which showed us that even silence can be the most powerful voice. He looked at the elder, who caressed a child's hair, in well-deserved peace. The village had learned that the vulnerability of one could become the greatest strength of all, and that empathy and human connection were the true traps against despair. The blizzard outside continued to howl, a constant reminder of Yakutia's relentless nature. But inside the cave, a new warmth had ignited. It was not the warmth of the fires, but the warmth of resilience, of renewed hope, of the certainty that, as long as there was a heart beating in unison with the earth, as long as there was the will to fight and the wisdom to listen, life would find a way. Anya, the deaf elder, had etched her name not only on the ice walls of the cave, but in the hearts of each of its 800 inhabitants, an eternal symbol of the strength of the human spirit, capable of transforming the impossible into a testament of faith and love for the community. The village breathed, not just relieved, but reborn, ready for the days to come, knowing that true wealth was not in provisions, but in the unbreakable unity of its people. The story of Anya, the elder who heard the earth in her silence, would be told for generations, an echo of courage and altruism that flourished even in the coldest heart of the world. The days that followed the stabilization of the cave were of a different kind of calm, a hard-won serenity. The blizzard, though relentless, no longer seemed so threatening, for the village had found a greater strength within itself. The fires crackled softly, shadows danced on the ice walls, and the murmur of conversations was a balm. Anya, in her soft fur, became the silent center of the community. No longer just a respected elder, but the living embodiment of resilience. Children, once shy, now sought her out to nestle close, as if her presence were a shield against the cold and fear. They watched her wrinkled fingers trace invisible patterns on the ice, imagining the earth's secrets. The young mother, whose baby survived thanks to Anya, brought her small gifts, dried meat, a warmer fur, gestures of gratitude that words could not express. Her eyes, once filled with terror, now shone with hope. Boris, the young hunter, matured, the responsibility of being Anya's voice, of translating her vibrations into actions, shaped his spirit. He walked with a firm posture, his eyes more attentive to the ground beneath his feet. He spent hours with Semyon, the elder, listening to ancient stories, learning about the cycles of the earth and ancestral methods. Semyon saw in Boris not just a successor, but a vital link between ancestral wisdom and the future. Anya taught us to listen beyond hearing, Semyon would say, and Boris showed us that youth can carry tradition with honor. The entire village changed. The need to move provisions and seal the cracks forced unprecedented cooperation. Tasks were divided equitably, food rationed fairly, and mutual care became law. Women, once dedicated to domestic chores, now actively participated in the maintenance of the cave, learning to identify signs of instability in the ice. Men who hunted and protected also dedicated themselves to strengthening community bonds, sharing stories and songs. The blizzard, which continued to fall outside, no longer seemed an isolating threat, but a backdrop for the unity that had formed. The winter was still long and the challenges had not disappeared. The scarcity of game remained a concern, but the vital provisions were safe, and the most important lesson was learned. True wealth did not lie in material abundance, but in the strength of the human spirit, in the ability to adapt, to trust one another, and to find solutions. Anya, in her silence, felt the change. The cave's vibration was now more harmonious, a chorus of souls at peace, despite the cold and darkness. She knew her time was running out, that each day was a gift. But she knew that her legacy would not only be the saved provisions or the stabilized cave, it would be the seed of a new consciousness, of a community that had rediscovered the depth of its connection with the earth and with one another. Her eyes, fixed on the ice that surrounded her, saw not just the coldness, but the pulsing life, the promise of a new dawn, even in the heart of the harshest winter. The future of the village was indeed secure, not by a heroic action, but by the collective transformation Anya had inspired.